Welcome to another episode of I Catch Killers. As a detective, the greatest compliment anyone could give me was to say I wouldn't want him chasing me. Well, I can tell you, you don't want today's guest chasing you, because he doesn't give up and he's very good at his chosen profession. Today's guest is a private investigator. That's right, he's a PI. Fictional private investigators are often portrayed as can-do, quirky characters who are a little battle-scarred and wise to the ways of the world. That type of description fits nicely with today's guest. But he's also a person who has embraced the changing landscape of crime to stay one step ahead of the people he is investigating. I don't hand out compliments lightly, but I've got to say, today's guest is one of the best investigators I've come across, and that includes a lot of great detectives I've worked with. Having had a look at the cases he had solved, or helped to solve, you'd think I was talking about an elite police squad rather than a private investigator in his company. His body of work is truly amazing. You might have heard of notorious conman Peter Foster. Well, today's guest helped track him down on numerous occasions. And I think it would be fair to say he's not one of Foster's favourite people. You've probably also heard of the missing Belgian backpacker, Theo Hayes, who disappeared in Byron Bay. Well, today's guest has utilised his skills to shed light on what may have happened to Theo. They're just some of the cases. He's been a private investigator for over 33 years and has worldwide experience in over 30 countries. He's captured elusive con artists and fugitives from around the world. But don't think this is just white-collar crime. His investigations have involved some hardcore organised crime. He's also had his life threatened more times than he cares to remember, and has been assaulted whilst doing his job. I've had the pleasure of discussing several cases with him, and I'm just blown away by the innovative approaches he takes to crack those cases. I'm going to really enjoy this chat. So, Ken Gamble, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thank you very much, Gary. Pleasure to be here.
Ken, I've been obviously in preparation, as you'd understand, before you sit down to interview someone, prepare and looking at some of the stuff you've done. You've been a very, very busy person.
Absolutely. A lot happens in 33, 34 years.
Yeah. But it's, you certainly seem like you're just not stopping.
No,
it's getting busier
just
and busier.
Warming up. The industry has evolved so much, and with technology evolving, we've been evolving with it, and I think that's part of the secret. We can constantly re-emerge in different industries. Like now, it's crypto crime.
Yeah.
So it's just constantly evolving.
That seems to be, and I've had a look at it, and obviously I look at your career from a detective's point of view and that, but there seems to be, you have that capacity to stay one step ahead. Like you embrace the changes and think, okay, well, I'm going to stay ahead of the pack here. Is that how you've approached your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done everything that you can do in this industry, all types of work. I started out in the late 80s in covert surveillance as a surveillance guy, and the surveillance industry was really big back then, particularly with insurance fraud and that type of thing.
Yeah.
The industry was sort of separated by surveillance squads and factual investigators. It was very divided.
Yeah.
But I soon grew out of that work. It wasn't challenging enough anymore. It was only in New South Wales. I wanted to grow and start working interstate, international, and I guess I used to get bored too easily.
Yeah.
If it wasn't, challenging enough, I would then move on to something more challenging, and that's what sort of consistently pushed me towards doing more and more challenging work.
Kept you one step ahead. Well, I've also looked into your background, and your childhood is. I think we could do a podcast just on your childhood. I'll just hit you with a couple of points, and if you could expand on it. That you grew up near Mount Isa in North Queensland.
That's correct. I grew up in Mount Isa.
Yep.
Went to school from 71 through to 78. Well, not all those years, because a couple of those years I was doing School of the Air on the radio out at an outback pub called the Gregory Hotel, 300 kilometres north of Mount Isa.
And that's a pub that your father ran?
That's right. My father bought it and owned it for several years, and the whole family moved up there in the middle of nowhere, middle of the Gulf country. It was surrounded by cattle stations.
Yes.
So the biggest one being 2,000 square miles. an incredible place to grow up. I was riding bikes, driving trucks, bulldozers, shooting guns, doing all of that kind of stuff as a 12-year-old.
And you actually ran your own business. You were one step ahead with the Uber, because wasn't part of your role as a 12-year-old, and I think there's statute of limitations here, so I think we can talk about it and you'd be right, but part of your role as a 12-year-old was to drop home, let's say, the inebriated or happy customers from your father's pub.
Every Friday night, I used to get paid $50. I'd take all the drunks home to a property, a station called Mellish Park. It was there were a bunch of what we call ringers that work on the station, and they'd come in and get drunk, and there'd be a whole bunch of them. Of course, none of them could get home, and it's about a 50-mile drive to the pub. So they used to pay me $50. I'd drive them all out. They'd all be crashed out in the back of it was a Dodge International, 70s model or whatever. And I'd drive out and go through the gates and get them home. It took about an hour to get.
This is a 12-year-old.
12-year-old, yeah, 12 years old. Sometimes
they grow up quickly in the country.
Sometimes my brother would come. He was 14, but quite often I would just do the drive on my own.
Yeah, and
they'd be all crammed in the car. There'd be 8 or 10 of them sometimes, and half of them or most of them would be crashed out by the time I got there, all drunk, Yeah, and I'd get out of the
wake them up,
I'd push them out, push them off the back of the truck to get them off, and then I'd drive home again. So that was a regular occurrence for me as a 12-year-old. I made $50, $50 a pop.
There's different ways of learning life skills, and that's certainly one that would have sharpened up your skills. I would imagine that have helped you later on in life.
Absolutely. I mean, just the type of characters that we would come across, and there was so much violence in the pub. There was so much fighting every weekend. No police, no law enforcement, didn't exist. The dad was the publican. The only law enforcement person in the community was the publican. If you got kicked out of the pub, that was like going to jail.
Yeah, okay, that's. But it would have created a capable young fella in yourself to be able to look after, because you're driving tractors and all sorts of things.
Absolutely, and we're just learning guns, firearms. We had each. I had a 22 lever action Winchester at the age of 12. Used to go out shooting kangaroos and bush turkeys, and it was just normal. It was kind of like there was so much freedom because you're out in the middle of nowhere. You're on the plains. There's no such thing as police, or there's rules that you have to play by in the outback. But it was just a great environment. There was no TV, no radio, obviously no internet back then. It was very, very isolated.
And I reckon you'd have to be able to keep your hands up too, as
absolutely.
In your fighting skills.
Well, that's where I learned to fight. My dad used to kick a lot of the local ringers when they'd get drunk. He used to kick them out, and there'd be punch-ups out the front of the pub at night, and quite often, they'd want to have a go at my dad.
Yeah,
because he'd be throwing them out of the pub, and then the sons would come and have a go at me. And I found myself quite often in punch-ups with these younger, both Indigenous men, young boys that were out there. It was a very big Indigenous community out there. We had a camp down the back, and I used to hang out with them. And some of my best friends ended up becoming, a couple of young Aboriginal guys that I grew up with ended up being my best friends.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's and I think it's important that, and the reason I've talked about your upbringing, because I think it's going to tell people a lot about how you've managed to carry out the work that you've done and achieve what you've done in your chosen field as a private investigator. But your boxing skills carried you. You won some titles, Queensland and Australian titles.
Yes, I started boxing when I started. I moved from North Queensland down to Yamundi on the Sunshine Coast at the end of 1977. my dad packed up his truck and sold the pub, and we came down with animals. It was a bit like Noah's Ark. We had a couple of horses on the back, and when I got down and started high school, I was a bit of an outcast. Everyone had long hair. 1978.
Yeah.
Everyone was surfing.
I had hair back then.
Yeah. I had a skinhead haircut because I came from the outback, white skin and
you would have
short
out.
And all of these people in the school photo looks funny because they've all got long hair, and I got this skinhead haircut, come from the outback. I had to punch up the first day of school. Yeah. Someone, picked on me, and I did what I knew to do, and that's fight back, But I started going to boxing. I thought I better learn to look after myself, and started boxing at the Golden City Boxing Club in Gympie. My mum used to drive me up there every afternoon after school, which is quite a drive from Cooroy, the high school, up to Gympie, and started training. And I really liked boxing. My trainer, George Mills, used to train us, and I then he decided that I was ready to start fighting. So I started having tournament fights as an amateur boxer.
Yeah.
Always light middleweight.
Yep.
I was light middleweight, 71 kilos back then, and had my first fight. I think it was in Gympie. Fought a guy called Ashley Appo. It was a knockout win for myself, and it made the headlines in the newspaper. And that was the start of my boxing career. And I then went on to win the Queensland light middleweight title in '82.
Yeah.
And I was then selected for the Australian, for the team, the Queensland team, to represent Queensland at the Australian titles in Perth. And I went over and fought in the Belmont Recreation Centre in Perth in July of '82. I was up against Craig Bushby, who had had about 90 fights.
Yeah.
And everyone said I was going to get flattened by this guy. He was a tough boxer. I'd had 20-something fights at that point, maybe 25 or something. And it was, for me, I didn't want to come back a loser. I was going to fight to the death.
Yeah.
That was my mentality. I was very fit. I used to run up mountains carrying milk buckets because we had a dairy. And I used to train. And I knew that fitness was the biggest thing in boxing. The fitter you are, the more chance you have. And it was like fighting to the death because you really are getting severely hurt. Back in those days, it was before headgear was introduced. And it was before they stopped fights when people would bleed. So when you bleed in those days, in 1982, you just kept bleeding and they kept the fight going.
Yeah, it was a different world.
Yeah. So I fought Craig Bushby in the finals. And won on points. It was a real battle, punch for punch for punch for punch, the whole fight.
And again, that's the sort of resilience and tenacity that comes into your work. So it's interesting that these are the type of things that mould you into the person that you became, or the type of work that you've done. Because another thing that I think contributed to your skills as a private investigator, you also joined the fire brigade. You had a stint with the fireys.
1984, joined the Noosa Fire Brigade, Queensland Fire Service, as an auxiliary fireman, but part-time. And started doing training and learning to become a fireman. And of course, I went through all of that training, got my certification in live rescue, first aid, all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed that. I actually thought maybe I could be a fireman as a job. So I used to spend a lot of shifts doing as many hours as possible. Sometimes I would work full shifts. But I found back in those days, most of our incidences were not fires. They were head-on car crashes on the Bruce Highway. We covered a big stretch of highway, and I saw too many head-on smashes, too many gruesome,
not nice things.
I'm 18 years old, and it was horrible. Some of the things that I saw, and we fought some pretty severe fires too, particularly bushfires. So I loved the fire brigade. I was from 84 to 87. I got made sure I got a reference when I left from the chief officer at the time, and got a great reference, which I collected. I always believed in collecting references everywhere I.
Yeah, well, it helps to build up the resume, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and it helped me to put me where I ended up in Sydney. But the fire service was great. It was really good.
Rounding off another skill set that you picked up in the infantry, you Army reservist.
Yeah, one of my mates in the fire brigade in '84 was a corporal in the Army Reserve, a 9 RQR A company in Nambour in the Sunshine Coast, and he used to come in sometimes with his Army uniform and get changed into his fire uniform, and I thought that was quite interesting. Coming from one discipline to another, and I started inquiring, and he said, come down and have a look. And I went down one night to Nambour on a Tuesday night, because that was parade night every Tuesday, and I instantly was attracted to that challenge, so I joined. I got enlisted the 5th of May 1985. I got my certificate of enlistment. I know that because it's still on my wall. And I went to Greenbank in Brisbane, did my recruit course, and then went on to do the initial employment training course and exercises, and went through the whole infantry training and became a qualified soldier.
And again, that does give you skills and logistic skills, and being part of a team, and having a mission and objective, and toughens you up too. Not that you need toughening up if you grew up as the son of a pub owner in outback Queensland, but it all helps. And the point I'm making here, as we lead into your career, there's one more thing that you did to round off your preparation. So if anyone's listening, I'm sure if they hear your stories, there's going to be a lot of people saying, I want a piece of this. I want to be a private investigator or private eye. You also did some acting.
I did. In 99, I was single, and my friend Sandra Lee Patterson, who owned an acting school, said to me, why don't you come along and do some lessons? We've got all these girls, they're all like supermodels, and they come to I said, I'll come and have a look one night. And I walked in, and there's all these beautiful single girls there, and I thought, wow, this is
acting's for me.
So all my mates are down the pub getting drunk, and here I am with 6 supermodels about to do a scene of intimacy, or whatever it may be. But I started going to the training, and I really liked it. It was challenging, confronting.
Yep.
And I just really, really liked it. And so I started doing the course. I did the Night of Summer program, which was a 2 or 3 day course. I did the TV presenters course. I always loved mucking around with cameras and filming things when I was younger, filming all my adventures. On the Army, I used to sneak a little pocket camera on our exercises. Wasn't supposed to, but used to snap shots and just to keep the memoirs, So I got into the acting, and one night Sandra Lee said that we have a special guest coming tonight. It's Jeff Bennett, director of Water Rats, and
people. I think most people would know Water Rats. It was a very popular show.
Absolutely,
around the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't have an agent. I mean, I was just going to acting lessons. I was just an acting student, learning how to read scripts. And I thought this could be a good career, because at that time I was thinking about whether or not I want to stay in the industry as a private eye.
Yeah.
And if I did stay in the industry, I'd have to evolve into a new area of what I was doing. And it was at that crossroads where I was thinking maybe there's other careers that I could try that were challenging, and acting was one of them. And then in 2000, when I met Jeff Bennett at a workshop, I got one of those phone calls that everyone dreams about, from Sandra Lee saying, I've just had a call from Jeff Bennett, and he wants you to go down to Faith Martin casting tomorrow and have a casting for a part on Water Rats as an internal affairs detective.
Yeah.
So I did that.
Yep.
I came straight from work, didn't even get dressed up, wear the collar and tie, and went waltzed on straight down. Had to learn a script, and did the scene. It was pretty easy.
Yeah.
For me, I thought it was really straightforward. And then they rang me the next day. Congratulations, you've got the part. And it was an 80-worder.
Yeah.
With Steve Bisley,
wow.
who's the star of the show.
Yeah.
So next thing
it wasn't just a walk on, walk off. Yeah.
No, and it wasn't a one-liner. Like usually when you first start acting, you know, and not only was it an 80-worder, it was the opening scene of the show.
Yeah.
Bye Charlie, it's called. It's still on YouTube.
You watch it every night, do?
No, I haven't seen it for a long time, and I was going to send you the link, but it's there because some people have pointed it out to me over the years. But I still remember my lines, of course. But I all of a sudden I'm on Goat Island, getting the VIP treatment and on set, and I thought, this is fantastic.
This is for me.
This is for me. This is what I like. Yeah. I'm going to do this.
Mel Gibson, step aside.
I'm going to be in Hollywood before we know it, you know. And so I ended up getting an agent, and then I got little parts on Young Lions. I got a part on All Saints.
Yep.
And little bits of you know, short films, and I played one very interesting part. All policemen, by the way. I'm always a cop.
You've got that look.
I'm always a cop, right? Yeah. Always typecast as a cop, either uniform, detective, internal affairs. You know, I ended up doing one film called Ra Choi, which was about Vietnamese gangs in Cabramatta.
Yeah.
A full-length movie, and I played a very small part in that, which was a comical part as a cop, and. You know, but then there wasn't much money in it. There's a lot of time involved. There's a lot of castings to go to. Most of the time you don't get the role. So it's a very time-consuming profession.
Yeah.
For very little reward.
And there's a pyramid at the top of
there's
people.
A pyramid at the top. A bit like boxing, you know, 99% of the time training.
Yeah.
1% glory, you know, if you're lucky. And that's like acting's the same, you know. But I just love doing it. I love the scenes we used to do. You know, that to me was really appealing because
I think too. Like we've looked at your upbringing and what's brought you to the work that you're doing now. But that acting is understanding communication, it's understanding people's emotions, and all of which, for a good investigator, now I call detective, we call investigator, whether it's private investigator or detective, we're all doing the same thing, trying to find the truth.
Yep.
Reading body language, understanding human nature, it all comes into play. And I think for a build-up for someone to become a private investigator, you're ticking all these boxes with your life experience.
It was the perfect combination because I was learning all this stuff that I was using in my job.
Yep.
I did undercover work. I worked in bars, undercover in pubs.
So acting, playing the role.
You know, putting on a persona. All of that impromptu stuff, you know. When I was doing surveillance operations, there was always confrontations and people chasing us. We would get compromised. I'd get compromised on a property and I'd have kangaroo shooters chasing me or something. You know, it was there was always opportunities where I was confronted by very angry people who I was following, and I'd have to make up a really good story.
But you can draw on that experience and even your exposure in the army, because I'm sure there's, in your surveillance type situations, there would have been some uncomfortable positions you've found yourself in, and I'm talking physically uncomfortable, whether you're hiding or spending a long time in the bush or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. When I say I was part of a team, a surveillance team, about 10.
So 10 this is we've got a little bit ahead of ourselves. This is with Webster's.
Yeah, Webster's.
Webster's. Right. Okay, and a lot of their work, and you explained it before. You said covert or factual. So covert is what people would see as the surveillance police, the people out there watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I first started with my military background and everything, they were looking for people to train in surveillance to go out and watch people that had personal injury claims.
Yeah.
because the government insurance office at that time, they had a contract with the GIO. So Webster's was the official company contracted to the GIO.
Yeah.
So all of those GIO claimants that were out bumping into each other in the night, putting in big 100,000
for the sore neck.
The sore neck.
Yeah.
We were the team that used to go out all over the state, and sometimes interstate, and we would watch those people and film them secretly.
Yeah.
And capture them on film. And people that can't work, they go to the doctor with a neck brace in a wheelchair.
Yep.
Sometimes, and they come out of the doctor, get out of their wheelchair, rip the neck brace off, and then go home and do the gardening.
Yeah.
And we used to capture it on film. So that's where I got all my experience over that 15 years in surveillance.
Yeah, with those injuries, that was very prevalent, and I suppose it still is to a degree. So the role of a private investigator there is capturing images, photos, demonstrating that the injury is not as bad as the potential victim.
Correct. So we were gathering evidence for the insurance company to ascertain the veracity of the claims and ascertain whether or not these claims are genuine. Usually, the referrals would come from doctors saying that this person is malingering, that I don't believe that they're as bad, they're exaggerating their injury.
Yeah.
And then the doctor's reports would come to us. We get this big medical file. I read hundreds of medical files. And then our job would be to go out and observe their movements. And because there were so many claims and so many jobs, it was a very, very busy company.
Yeah.
And we had just hundreds of operations around the state.
And to explain to people, like I'm very familiar with surveillance from policing background, but there literally would be occasions where you get dropped into a bushland and as you would see on TV, you're sitting in the bush with your camera.
Absolutely.
And your thermos of coffee or your drink, and there you sit for the next 10 or 12 hours.
Correct, that's right. And that was one of my specialties that I built up a reputation on, being able to go into difficult terrain, particularly remote properties or properties occupied by undesirable people with criminal records and bikie gangs and things like that. I had a nickname of Eddie the Emu because they used to see me just running through the bush and disappearing.
Yeah.
So I got this nickname. Everyone had a nickname back then. But I would get dropped off always in darkness.
Yeah.
I would, down in Griffith, for example, I would cross a tunnel full of carp, the eels.
Yeah.
We'd have to cross get wet, which was tough in winter. But we'd have to cross this tunnel to get into the properties. This like a moat almost around. It was an irrigation channel. And we would sneak in and hide under a tree or in a bush, full camo gear. It was all the stuff from the army. I'd bring it back out again.
Yeah.
I had my camo net, my backpack. I'd have a big video camera with a VHS porta pack in those days, big 35mm lenses. And we would capture video and photos, mainly video, of the claimant, the person that we were targeting. And we had all sorts of tricks that we would use to identify people. We'd do a drive-in where someone would drive into the property and pretend they're lost or something. Yeah. And bring them out of the house, and so we could get video of them to identify them, and all sorts of tricks. But we would stay there all day until it was dark at night.
And then come out.
And then come out and sneak out again.
Yeah.
And some of those operations turned pear-shaped and got really ugly.
And you have got to think on your feet. And I'm familiar with operations like that. And you said it gets cold down in Griffith. It's either very hot or very cold. Seems to be. And I don't think anyone can fully appreciate, because I did this with tactical policing as well, that around about 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning before the sun's come up and you are that numb. I say with the gun, you felt like your fingers wouldn't work to pull the trigger. With the camera, you'd be the same.
Exactly the same. And
you'd freeze.
That's right. And luckily, being in the military, I was geared up. So thermal underwear, that's a great, thermal underwear just keeps you so warm.
Yeah.
So I was always geared up with the right gear, but in freezing temperatures, when you try to put that finger on the trigger of the camera, and it's cold and icy, and
you're shaking.
It's really difficult.
But as much as we talk about the bad side, it was also exciting. That's what I remember about doing surveillance and the type of stuff you just telling us there. I think they were good times. It's like playing games when you're a kid.
Absolutely, yeah. It was so much fun. We used to stay. We couldn't stay in Griffith when we were down doing the big operations down there. We would have to stay in Leeton, which is 50 kilometres away. We got to see all the country towns around New South Wales, from Menindee, Broken Hill, up to Wellington, up to the northern borders. Just amazing. We got to see so much beautiful country. Yeah. And we would go into a town covertly under a pretext always,
And it's hard to slip into a country town because everyone wants to know your business.
Absolutely. And we would be an electrical contractor doing a job, whatever, we'd have vans with electrical tapes, or we would look like kind of tradies. Yeah. It was always undercover. We could never tell anyone what we were really doing.
My cover in country towns was that I was selling tractors, and you could see their eyes glaze over and walk away from me because you'd be in a pub, and when you were in there and you weren't, you were trying to do something covert. What are you doing here? Here selling tractors. Have you got a tractor? And they just wander
Absolutely.
off. But you got to have things like that. So we've sort of jumped ahead on the stuff that you're doing, the covert surveillance and all that. But I think the public would be really interested in what is actually a private investigator, private eye. We see how they're portrayed on television and in fictional characters. They're always disheveled and battle scarred. You need qualifications. You need to be qualified. You can't just put your hand up and say, I want to be a private eye, can you?
Anyone could, but they have to get qualifications, and in order to get a license to actually investigate. In the old days, it was quite easy to get a license. Almost anyone could get one back in the 80s and 90s. But these days, it's a lot more strict. The New South Wales Police took over the licensing of private inquiry agents and commercial agents, and so now it's strictly vetted by the police force. And you have to obviously, abide by all the rules and regulations of the license, but you also have to have meet certain standards of qualifications by doing a course in order to get your license. So, and once you get your license, you can then work, legally in the business, even though you may be inexperienced. You've got some certificate to say that I've had some experience. So people often get into the industry randomly. They just decide one day I want to be a private eye. Others come from law enforcement, particularly ex-police. Obviously, that's the most obvious place to go from the police into some sort of private investigation work. But the type of people that get into it, just anyone that's motivated, that's highly motivated and has an interest and in gathering information and evidence, because private investigators are usually hired by a client, whether it's an individual or a corporation or even a government. They're someone that's hired to do a specific job. Yeah. So the person that hires them, usually, if an individual hires a private eye, they're hiring that private eye because they don't have the skills to be able to find someone, for example. Yeah. In the old days, the private inquiry agent's license was had a section on it that we could obtain and furnish information about the personal character or actions of any person, or search for missing persons. Yeah. They were the two main functions of private eyes. In the old days. Nowadays, of course, it's just exploded into so many different types of investigation work, all of which has to be licensed in New South Wales or other states. But a lot of the work I do internationally, you don't have to be licensed because we're operating across borders.
That's a point. Like the jurisdiction, is it New South Wales? You can be a private investigator licensed within New South Wales. Does that afford you, you're qualified if you work interstate?
There's mutual recognition that you have to, you can register in other states to work in those states, but over the years, I've worked extensively around Australia in every state. I've been stopped by police in every state for doing work and surveillance and things like that. Never ever was I ever challenged about my credentials. I would show my New South Wales licence and say that I'm here in Queensland to do a surveillance operation.
And having that licence, that qualification, it does offer a degree of protection too, doesn't it? If you're the bloke that's standing outside the house trying to take photos into the front yard and the police pull you over, well, you're explaining what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a licence to spy.
Yeah.
You are allowed to follow people. You don't come under the stalking legislation.
That's a interesting point. Yeah.
You actually have the authority to observe anybody.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if they're a police officer, a judge.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who the person is that you're watching. You are allowed to conduct surveillance for a lawful purpose, of course.
A lot of it, and I think a lot of people identify with private eyes with the cheating husband or the missing wife, that type of thing. Was that a body of your work in the early days?
Absolutely, did quite a bit of that. Everyone did. That was the industry was built on that sort of work.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, that was in the old days. That was the most common sort of private investigation work, was going out and catching a cheating spouse. In fact, my great uncle Ray Stubbs, he was a private investigator in the 60s and 60s and 70s. He was the one that got me the interview with Webster's in 1988.
Okay, so that was sort of you're at a loose end on what you wanted to do. And
he was the one that told me all about how he used to jump through windows and take photos of people in the act, and I thought, wow, that's exciting, following people around. And even though I got into insurance surveillance, we were also doing corporate work, undercover work, other criminal types. There was lots of opportunities to do different sorts of work, but the domestics would come and a client would hire us to go and put their spouse under surveillance, male or female, and we would I'll quite often catch them in the act and have to get it on film. So
it's not a 9 to 5 or an office job, is it?
No. We would work all hours through the night. Just definitely not a 9 to 5 job.
But I look at it as that's part of the attraction to the job.
Absolutely.
Because you'd go into work each day not knowing what you're going to do.
That's right. And you would have a limited amount of hours, and how you use those hours would be up to you. If you were good and smart about the hours, you would stake someone out at all different times.
Yeah.
To try and find out their routine rather than burn up all your hours in one day or whatever, So we were given hours and budgets on cases. Still to this day, we did a similar thing.
So because a lot of people wouldn't know this, so someone that approaches you, I'd say I'm looking for someone, he owes me money or something like that. I approach you and you say, well, look, I can find him. This is our hourly rate. Yep. It'll probably be 2 days worth of work. Yep. Is that how it goes?
Yeah, and then that's correct. Yeah.
Sign an agreement or have an agreement?
Yeah, an engagement letter. Yep. We set out the scope of work. What are we going to do? Are we just going to do database searches? Are we going to go and do physical inquiries? Are we going to go and do some surveillance? So we would map out a scope of work, and that scope of work would then identify what the budget would be, because depending on how much work they wanted us to do. And then we would access all of the available databases that we have. We have access to everything in Australia that's publicly available.
Yeah.
We don't have access to criminal records and things like that. Obviously, that's maintained by the government and police. But we certainly do get a lot of access to public records.
And knowing how to apply for those public records and access those public records is a big part, isn't it?
That's the art. The art is I know private investigators that still haven't heard of certain databases.
Yeah.
Because they just don't, they're don't have the awareness. But we're very big on databases, not just here, but I can log in to many countries around the world, including the US, the UK, several countries in Southeast Asia, Singapore. I can log straight into their database and I can pull records on individuals in those countries.
Yeah.
Because we have the access.
And that's the experience and skills that you have developed. How long were you at Webster's before you went out, and then you went out on your own?
3 years.
Yep.
Did 3 years with them as a contractor, and then I decided in 91, I decided to go out on my own as a surveillance specialist.
Yep.
I realised that I had a knack, particularly for the rural surveillance, the remote surveillance, the stuff that was more difficult, because there wasn't that many people that were good at it, or that would, I guess, be stupid enough. In some ways, I look back and some say it's courageous, some say the stuff I used to do was crazy. Sneaking, miles into someone's homestead on a remote property and being 100 metres away from their house, only to learn that they've got 2 German Shepherds.
That's not good.
And that's not good. And I used to do some crazy stuff, but over the years made a lot of mistakes, got caught. Next time I'd be more cautious.
Sometimes risk equals reward. So sometimes you got to take those risks.
Well. Yeah. Once I snuck into a property, they were trying to get this photo of this guy, this person, a criminal, someone with a criminal record. He had this big insurance claim in, multi-million dollars. He wouldn't turn up to his medical appointments. They needed a photo of this guy, and so I went into his property one day and got a photo, and came out, and they're looking at this photo saying, how the hell did you get this photo? It's so close of his face.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it was actually a photo of a portrait sitting on his table inside the house. It was like on the dressing table, like a wedding photo.
Yeah.
And I zoomed in and took a photo of it. He wasn't there, but I went in and got the photo, and you could see the glass shining on the.
You get a sense of the amount of skills that you need in this area, and you could specialise, but the broad-based skills that you've got to be technically savvy to use your cameras or whatever equipment that you're using. You got to have that ability to speak to people. You got to have your that silent footstep that good covert operatives have.
Yeah. So, and I had the fitness as well to be able to go on these rugged operations, put a pack on.
Yeah.
And go in for 2 days, and climb up a mountain or whatever it was.
That's interesting, because people don't expect that. But if you are prepared to do that, and I'm not going to drive the car in, I'll walk in. It might take me 2 days, but I'll walk in and walk out. No one will know I was there.
That's it, and that's that was one of the greatest weapons that we had, was our ability to move in a very stealth way, to get in. We would go and camouflage ourselves in some pretty bizarre locations, so that we could capture someone coming out. I remember Dubbo, the rebels' headquarters out there one day. They had all these claims going on. They were all putting in claims.
Well, that's going to end in tears if they found you there.
That would be very, very. But this particular day, they had an open day to the public, because they were trying to. They were putting it out there that we're not, violent thugs. We're just an outlaw motorcycle gang. And whilst during the surveillance operation, watching the club for a particular individual that had a massive claim in, they come out and put this sign up, and it was like a welcome sign. And all of a sudden, they open up the gates, and all these people are driving in. So I get out of the bushes and jump in the car and get out of my greens into my civvies, and next thing we're sitting at the bar inside the clubhouse.
Right.
But that was, that's the sort of stuff that used to happen.
Yeah. So when you set up your business, I think people's images of, okay, I'm a private investigator, you're going to have a dingy little office, and you're going to have a secretary that smokes and has a feet on the table answering phones, waiting for the case to come through.
Very cliche. That's what it's like on Magnum PI and the movies. It's very much, but it's not quite like that.
Okay.
These days, our office, for example, is an operations centre. So we have many different skill sets, from researchers to forensic analysts, intelligence analysts, cybersecurity and behaviour graduates that are doing,
because they'd be invaluable in this day and age. That type of skill.
The technical, technical team. We have half of our full-time staff are technical people.
Yeah.
And we need them for every case now, because the website, every case we do is cyber related.
Yeah.
And it involves cyber, whether it's an extortion, a blackmail, espionage, fraud, serious
So you
fraud.
can't have a couple of old dinosaurs sitting there that don't know how to use their iPhone and expect to...
Those days are long gone. In fact, we were just talking about this the other day. It's just so rapidly evolved.
Yeah.
The technology now, we have to keep up with the technology, the databases, the rapid changing technology. We've got to keep up with it.
Yeah.
And it's changing faster now than ever before. And for criminals, that's become a major benefit.
Yeah.
And the high-tech criminals out there are the ones raking in the big money.
They're the ones embracing it and exploiting it.
Absolutely. And it's multi-billion-dollar criminal industry now.
I want to talk later on about the changes that you've seen, like the time that you've been in your career and the changes you've seen in the way that crimes are carried out and how to investigate it. But let's talk about a couple of the cases that you've worked on. And one that... It seems like an incredible story, but it's the 5-year-old Australian girl that was kidnapped in Egypt.
Yeah, Lavana Okpa.
Do you want to tell us about that and how you became involved? Because I think we've talked about the cliche of the cheating husband and you're taking photos when he's out with his new girlfriend, but the type of work you're doing is, it's across the globe and it's at a major level. Do you want to tell us about this case?
Yeah, I'd started working in Europe in 2007 and I had started doing operations over there for different agencies, different types of work. And I developed a relationship with some Egyptian police and for doing piracy work, and in particular a certain general in Cairo, Egypt, that we were working with and we had a relationship with. When I was back in Australia in 2007, it would have been 2007, when Lavana was taken to Egypt for a visit to her Egyptian father, Australian mother, 5 years old, Australian girl, taken over for a visit to visit Dad, a custodial visit, and during the visit or after the visit, he didn't drop her off. He told the mother that she's never going to see the daughter again. He kidnapped her. He took her into hiding. He disappeared. So the embassy swung into action. They did what they could. There was about a 20-man police team appointed to try to find Lavana, but she'd vanished into the enormous city of Cairo.
And it's a horrendous crime. Like people, you could sort of dismiss it. Oh, well, it's a custody dispute within the family, but this is someone's 5-year-old daughter been taken.
Absolutely, and I saw it on TV. I was sitting there watching a current affair. Yeah. And I saw it on a current affair, and I saw this little girl being kidnapped in Egypt, and I got on the phone to my young lawyer that I was working with in Egypt, and I said, if you heard about this case, and I then contacted Channel 9, rang a producer that I knew there and said, hey, I've got a general in the Egyptian police, I might be able to help. Yep. And that's how it started. And then 9 decided to engage me. I got the police officer on the phone, on a conference call, and they subsequently engaged me to go over, sent me over there, and I started the mission of trying to unravel what had happened and try to track down Mohammed Okpa, the father. And altogether, well, that first trip was unsuccessful. I was there for a couple of months, got a lot of good leads, but was unable to locate the little girl. And then I had to leave and go on with other jobs and so forth. I ended up doing about 7 or 8 trips back there over the next 2 years. And each time I was there...
Back to Egypt, just following up on the leads.
Back to Egypt, from Europe. I was spending a lot of time in Europe at that time. In fact, when I was there, because I was there, I invited my pregnant wife to come and visit, and she went into labour early.
Right.
And my son was born premature in Cairo,
Right,
my first son, in June 2007.
Okay.
So that threw a spanner in everything, and but ended up we were there for 3 months. He got airlifted to Germany, and that was another story. But I ended up doing several trips back, and every trip back, I started planting more and more seeds to start developing informants and intelligence, because I realised at that stage of my career that information is power and intelligence is so powerful. And the most important thing I needed to do was I needed to get close to the family, his mum and dad and brother.
Yep.
I need to find a way. So I found out where they lived. It was very clear that Mohammed and the little girl were nowhere near the city of Tonto, which is a couple of hours from Cairo.
Yeah.
So I've recruited some young lawyers who were very young and their little brothers who were teenagers. I recruited this team, 4 of them, and I put them in an apartment, literally rented an apartment next door to the house of the family. And they end up staying there for 3 months in an apartment, and they developed a relationship with the family.
Right.
These kids met them in the street and started becoming friends. I started getting intel.
That's an elaborate plan there, Ken.
Very elaborate.
Yeah.
And that's how I eventually got the lead that led to us uncovering information.
Yeah.
But it was a series of different steps that we took. We even delivered a teddy bear once for her birthday. We delivered a teddy bear to the family with a tracker in it.
Right.
A GPS tracker inside.
Okay, yeah.
I
like it.
Hoping that it would get delivered, but it just stayed at the parents' house, never went anywhere. They said, oh, yeah, we've given it to her, but it just stayed there.
Yep.
So the tracking never worked out. We delivered, we tracked emails, all sorts of covert intelligence gathering tools we were using, because there was some communication with him and his lawyer and so forth. Anyway, we eventually, one of my young operatives that we had recruited and trained them on how to keep notes, how to use a video camera, trained them up, how to watch and observe. We paid them a little bit of money.
Yep.
And they were real happy. So one of them one day managed to get the cell phone of the brother, and while the brother was playing, he borrowed the cell phone to make a call, and he very cleverly, I didn't even tell him to do this, copied the SIM of one, put it in his phone and copied the SIM.
Right, okay.
And that was the break, because we had 40 numbers.
Yeah. And
of those 40 numbers, there was a couple of no names, just numbers with no name in there. And one of those numbers, we examined all 40 of them. One of the numbers came back to a Ukrainian female. Yep. And when we did checks on her, I thought that's unusual. We found out that she was married. She was a Ukrainian, had come down from Ukraine and had married Mohammed Akbar.
Right.
So it was his new wife.
Yeah.
So we got the address, but the address was, like George Street, Sydney. It was just a bland address. We went to this address, and it was just massive buildings. There was no building number. It was really quite difficult. So we then had to go and get records from Ukraine through our contacts in order to trace calls from Ukraine to Egypt to get a home telephone number, because we've identified the girl's parents in Ukraine, and we traced calls. Phone records. We traced calls to Egypt to a certain number, and that number was a home number. Yeah. And then we got that record, which gave us the actual building. Okay. And then through an internet connection, we traced that number to an internet service, which gave us also gave us the building, no unit number, because this is Egypt. This is like the Wild West, And we ended up we once we got the building, we put surveillance on the building. We put one of our Egyptian undercover operatives there outside. And the second day on the surveillance, this little girl comes out. She's 7 years old by this time. Her
2 years down the track.
Her baby teeth had gone. She looked a bit different.
Yeah.
And we'd set him up with covert footage. And all of a sudden, this little girl walks out. Actually comes home. She comes home from school.
Yeah.
And she walks in. And he talks to her. And he sort of asked her something in Arabic, because by this time the little girl speaks fluent Arabic, no English. She'd lost her English.
Yeah.
And then he got this video of her, a really close-up video of her face, and he just sort of asked her what her name is, and I think she said Marion.
Yeah.
Which is the name that she had been now using.
Yeah.
We went back and showed that video to the mother, and she broke down in tears.
Wow.
And that was it. We found her.
And then was it a case of then getting the Egyptian police involved?
Yes. So then we identified the father. Then he came back as well. We got him on surveillance video, and we were pretty excited. Yeah. A current affairs sent a crew across immediately. Yep. The crew deployed, and we planned an operation. We briefed the police on what was going on, and we set up a bit of an operation. But initially they were supposed to do surveillance, but they didn't do the surveillance. They just pulled up at the job and went straight in, right? Unbeknownst to us, which could have been a disaster. Because if he had seen them coming, he could have taken her again, and it was just really foolish. But we would not have done it that way. We would have waited until she come out and then grabbed her. Not grabbed her. Just the police would have moved in at that point. But it was risky just going in. But the police decided to go straight in. They went straight up, banged on the door, and we had a hidden camera at that time. And when we went in, Lavanna was in one of the rooms. She was sort of scared because of what was going on. All these people barging into the door, banging on the door, and the police grabbed him. Yep. And then let him out. He was arrested, taken away. The wife and the little girl were still in the apartment, and then Samantha, the mother, ran up, and we were filming when they were reunited. In the bedroom, which we captured on film. So it was an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved, particularly the mother.
Oh, I could imagine, like 2 years without your daughter, and that must give you a lot of satisfaction.
It was all to this day one of the proudest cases of my career. Yeah. It was so challenging. There was so much corruption in Egypt that we were getting led down these rabbit holes all the time, and and it was like an investigation. Yeah, it was a TED talk for an investigation. All the things that you put in place there, and all the information. But I know how demanding that would be. You each action has a reaction. You've got to be careful every step of the way. So it's a complicated little operation you had running there. But it paid off. They don't always pay off, but when they do. Absolutely. It took 2 years. Took 2 years of waiting patiently to be able to get that little lead. And that's what solves cases. And I guess I learnt that at a very early stage of my career, that if you want to solve a case, you have to leave no stone unturned, because that stone that you leave unturned is the one that's going to have the clue. Yeah. So if you're going to undertake an investigation, you have to be prepared to thoroughly look at every single aspect of the case, which you would know all too well. You cannot take shortcuts when you investigate those sort of things, because if you do, you will miss important evidence.
100%. But another aspect of the way that you approach that investigation that jumped out to me is the innovative way that you're looking at doing things. Sometimes you've got to think outside the square.
Absolutely. And we're getting, all these records and stuff that you can't get. Nobody can get except the police, but the police are not getting it. Yeah. Over there, the Egyptian police couldn't get records from Ukraine. Those two countries probably don't even talk to each other. You know,
so if they go through official channels, it
won't work.
Yeah.
It won't work. So we have to find ways and means and methods to be able to get those records that we need in order to advance a case. It's all intelligence.
Yeah.
And whatever, you know, we developed great relationships with the Egyptian police because of this case. A really good, dedicated team. We ended up working closely with the cybercrime division of the police there. And we did other operations with them after the Havana case.
Yeah.
Anti-piracy, drugs, counterfeit drug operations. So it was, but it was all about knowing how to get information and knowing how to use it, and being able to navigate all the corruption, and to be able to obtain or develop sources and contacts that were capable of giving you the information that you needed. And that's what makes a great investigator internationally, is your ability to source information and get you know, if you're in a foreign country, you have to be able to develop and those relationships with key individuals.
Well, you're crossing jurisdictions, and I know the barriers that we'd find in police just crossing jurisdictions. So it's full credit to you, like pulling that off. And the rewards are so high. Like if you recover a child like that. If you had to retire on your career and look back and have I done one good thing, well, that's one good thing that you've done.
It was a great achievement. I was just so happy for the family. I was featured in the story because they wanted to feature me in the story. But it was great. It was really good. And you know, Havana's now an adult. And we I haven't seen her for a very long time. But one of these days, we need to have a reunion.
Oh, well, your work's changed the course of so many people's lives.
Yeah, and that's one particular case where, you know, someone's life is dramatically impacted on the work that we do. And that's why when I sleep at night, I feel great about what I do. You know? And the job is very rewarding. When you get to that level of work where you can change someone's life, that makes a big difference.
Yeah. There's another case, a high-profile one, and just to give a sense of how it is a global business that you're running, but the abduction of Gabriel Johnson in 2009 in the US, and that was a very high-profile case. Do you want to talk us through that and your involvement in that one?
Yeah, I was brought in to investigate the disappearance of a young baby, Gabriel Johnson. He was about 9 or 10 months. The mother took him from Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, down to Texas, had a fight with the father of the baby. They weren't married, but the father of the baby, Logan McQuarrie. And she took the baby to illegally, because they're not allowed to take a child over state lines without permission.
Yep.
She took him to Texas, and because they'd had a fight, and she was being very spiteful, she decided to ring up Logan and tell him that she had killed the baby and dumped his body.
Right.
And he recorded that conversation. She spent several days in San Antonio, Texas, and then got on a bus, went to a department store, bought a backpack, dumped her grandfather's car that she'd borrowed, and got on a bus and went to Florida. She was arrested by the FBI in Florida with no baby.
Yeah.
The baby was gone. And she confessed to the FBI and to law enforcement that she had given the baby to someone in a park randomly, that she'd just given the baby away.
Yeah.
But later she told the full story about why she gave the baby and who she believed the people were and so forth. But the police didn't believe her. So the case became big in the media in the US. It was all over the news, and this missing baby, it was very, a harrowing case because everyone was thinking that this mother had killed this baby.
Yeah.
The parents, the father, with the help of a news reporter in San Antonio, got in touch with me. I was actually in Italy at the time, in Europe working.
Yep.
And I get this phone call. Can you fly? I was actually about to go to Lake Como on a vacation, on a holiday.
Yeah.
And I get this phone call. Can you please come to San Antonio, Texas? So it's one of those moments where
your family loves you.
Yeah, that's one of those moments where do I do this or do I say no?
Yeah.
And I looked at the case and I thought, yeah, okay, this is something I'd like to be involved in.
Yeah.
So I got straight on a plane and I flew to Texas.
Yeah.
Sat down with the family. Logan, his parents I got briefed on the case immediately. I was out the next day banging on doors at the hotel where she stayed and so forth. What I soon learned that there was a couple that were involved that had helped her. Basically, they had no intention of kidnapping the baby, but they organised while she wanted to run away from things for a while.
Yep.
And they were going to help mind the baby while she did a runner and spent a week away having a break.
Yeah.
That was the intention.
But it escalated.
But what happened is the couple that were assisting her organised for someone to come to, this is what I believe it happened, and there's a lot of credible evidence to demonstrate that this is what happened. That the couple that were assisting organised for someone to come to the park to meet her so that she could hand over Gabriel before she took off.
Right.
That was all planned and organised. Later, that was all proven to have occurred through phone records.
Yep.
And she was going to go off and have her trip, but when she got on the bus, she couldn't resist but to try and do or say something that's really going to hurt him.
Stir up the ex.
So she'll stir up the ex. Yep. So she rings him.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to her, he's recording it.
Yep.
And she says, I've killed him. She's in tears. I've killed him and I've dumped his body.
Right.
So, of course, there's a full-scale investigation involving the FBI and San Antonio Police Department took lead in the case.
Yep.
In fact, the homicide squad took lead in the case.
Yeah.
Because they thought we're looking for
a murder,
a dead baby.
Yeah.
They dug up the landfill. It was on the news every night of the week. The dump, what we call the dump, the landfill. They had dug up an enormous amount of land, rubbish and dirt, and looking for this missing baby. Meanwhile, the couple that have taken the baby have done a runner and gone underground because obviously they're now the targets of a kidnap investigation.
Yeah.
And because of what she said, because they never knew that she was going to get on the bus and say that. Elizabeth Johnson, the mother, never knew that he was going to record it and that this is going to blow up into a massive big case.
Yeah.
So there was a whole series of things that happened that were very unfortunate. And the baby, meanwhile, is gone, nowhere to be found. So I started my investigation, started gathering all this information and records, and I got access to some of the police brief because the police had charged this couple, particularly the female, with offences relating to custodial interference.
Right.
Because there was evidence that she had interfered with the custodial case between the mother and the father. So she was charged with that, and as a result of those charges, the police were able to serve a brief
Public
with
record.
all of the information. I got access through her lawyer because I wanted to interview this woman. She said, yeah, no problem, come along. I went to Phoenix, Arizona. I went to visit her lawyer, and ultimately she wouldn't turn up for the interview. So anyway, I got access to the brief. I looked through all the phone records and I started to piece together a very clear picture about who was involved because I had access to her confession that she made to the police. Yeah. And she had confessed and broken down in tears and told them the truth. This is who was involved. This is what happened. This is what they told me to do. This is where I went. I went to Raymond Rimkus Park on this day at this time. Everything that she said in that confession could be proven to be accurate. She even wrote notes in a book, directions to the park.
Okay.
And she'd forgotten about that.
Pretty compelling evidence.
It's
support.
Very, very compelling. They said it in the interview did you make any notes? She said, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But we had her notebook, and we found the note. There it was in her own handwriting, Raymond Rinkus Park, 10 a.m. or whatever. Unbelievable evidence to prove that her confession was true, that she was telling the truth. All the phone records told the whole story. So I painstakingly sat there for days going through the phone records, putting the picture together of what happened and who was involved. Fox 5 News was so excited about this, they put it on air immediately. And, of course, I had 20 news crews from all over America, including the Nancy Grace show and NBC, and chasing me. They sent all these crews to Phoenix to try and interview me. I took off to San Antonio, back to San Antonio. I was going back and forth. And all these crews are chasing me everywhere trying to get an interview. I refused because I didn't want to make a circus over it. I wanted to just do the job.
Yeah.
So I never did any interviews, except I ended up doing one with Fox 5 because they broke the story about the phone records. And of course, when that went public, it caused a big stir. She subsequently was sent to prison. She got 5 years in jail for kidnapping.
Yeah.
And she served a sentence, still always maintaining that she never killed the baby, that she gave the baby away.
We still don't know where the...
And she always told the truth. This is the crazy part, is that she was telling the truth and no one believed her. And no one was willing to prove that she was telling the truth. So when I went into the case, I looked at as we do as private investigators, we look at everything with an open mind, and we have to look at all the information. Don't have any judgment, or go into it very open-minded and look at what the evidence tells. And I train my investigators to follow the evidence. To let the evidence tell the story. Don't be persuaded by the look of her or the sound of her.
Or don't make the evidence fit the...
make the evidence fit the crime.
Yeah. Right?
The other way around.
Yeah.
Make sure that you let the evidence tell the story. Otherwise, you don't have a case, So anyway, that was kind of, after I exposed what I believe had really happened and was interviewed on Fox News, sometime after that, the family still didn't want to believe it. Even the father's own family was still believing that that the baby's murdered.
Yeah.
Even though there's compelling evidence to prove otherwise.
It is compelling, the evidence that you've outlined there. You would think could change their thoughts on it.
So I then gave up on the case and flew back to Australia, and that was the end of it for me.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's now a movie being made, a documentary film.
Well, it's one of those mysteries that, and especially when it's a child, that people want answers, and that mystery, and it's like it's going to divide people's opinions. Someone's, no, she's done it, she hasn't done it. Or
that's right.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But and you're quite right when you say that you've got to rely on the evidence. The evidence takes you down the path.
Absolutely.
And if you've got preconceived ideas, that you can contaminate your thinking and the way that you approach the evidence. But look, I think now is probably a good time to have a break. When we get back, we've got so much more to talk about. Your cases, I'm just sort of blown away. I feel like I'm talking to a whole squad in the New South Wales Police with some of the cases. But when we get back, we're going to talk about some other high-profile cases. Tracking down Peter Foster, you're his nemesis, rather than him being your nemesis. But,
absolutely, I'm definitely not on his Christmas card list.
No, I don't think you're popular. Threats against your life, the work you did in the Philippines, and I think that's where I first became aware of the type of work that you're doing, and why you met with the president of Sri Lanka on a couple of occasions in the palace, and also another one that's very much in the media at the moment, and for people would be aware of it, the missing Belgian backpacker, Theo Hayes. You've had some work on that. So when we get back, that's what we're going to talk about. But I'm finding it fascinating. And I like the way you go about your business.
Great. Thanks, Gary.
Cheers.